Good evening and welcome to the March 24th public hearing on the fiscal year 2016 budget for the school department. We're glad to have you join us. I'd like to announce that this meeting is being recorded by the East Hampton Public Access Cable. The school committee would like to recognize and thank the following volunteers for, well, one volunteer, Tim Riley, for taping tonight's production. East Hampton Public Access Cable Station Channels 5, 19, and 20 is looking for volunteers. If anyone is interested in helping to tape city government meetings, please contact Kathy Lynch at 413-203-1360. So, the item on our agenda for this evening is a hearing on our budget, proposed budget for the fiscal year 2016. So at this time, I'll turn the floor over to our superintendent, Nancy Follinsby.
Thank you, Deb. I am going to actually move myself over to the podium because I'm going to start by walking you through the budget pages in your budget document, but then I also have a PowerPoint that I think will help add more detail to the budget, and there'll be opportunities for you to ask questions. So I'm just going to move over to the podium. So as I mentioned, I will start by walking you through the tabs of the budget book. I will then use the PowerPoint to add more detail to the explanation of the proposed budget. So tab 1 contains the mission statement, the core values, and the new strategic plan approved in October of this year. The strategic plan is what drives all of our budget work as we develop the budget. Tab 2 contains a chart of enrollment data and projected numbers for the 2015-2016 school year based on current March enrollment numbers. And for those of you who are at home, this budget document is available on our website at www.epsd.us. Tab 2 also contains charter and choice information, and I will be addressing this in more detail in the PowerPoint. Tab 3 contains a history of school department appropriations from the city, a history of funding and positions lost when funding wasn't adequate to maintain a level service budget. A level service budget is funding to maintain all the services that are in a current year into the next year. And it also contains a description of grants acquired for the district and a history of the amount of grant funding from year to year. This will also be addressed in greater detail in the PowerPoint. Tab 4 contains charts and graphs of how the budget is spent and the school department funding sources. Again, this will be addressed in greater detail as we go on. Tab 5, when we get to Tab 5, Andy Paquette, our business manager, will walk you through the line item budget by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Function Codes. This is how we have to report our budget to the state, and this will happen at the end of the PowerPoint. So I'm going to kind of walk you through some more information, and then Andy will come up and walk you through the line items of the budget. As I go through the PowerPoint, if you have questions, you can certainly ask them at that point in time. I'll kind of keep my eyes open to see if there are any questions. And then, of course, there'll be more time for questions and discussion at the end of the presentation. So let's see here. Andy. Oh, here we go. All right. So the primary goals of the proposed budget are alignment with the 2014 to 2017 district strategic plan, to provide a learning environment where all students are fully engaged in their learning and have equal access to high quality curriculum and instruction. To cultivate a safe and supportive environment that promotes each student's academic, social, and emotional growth. To to use data appropriately to guide meaningful decisions to improve student learning, and to increase digital literacy throughout the community. The financial considerations that were part of our budget development were to contain as much as possible the costs associated with a small district striving to have a diversified curriculum, stay competitive, and be in compliance with all academic, health, and safety mandates and requirements. And to account for contractual increases, unanticipated increases in special education tuitions, and reductions in available school choice and grant funds. Decreases in grant funds are as a result of reduced funding from the state, and decreases in school choice amounts are due to the amount of school choice funding used over the years to balance the budget. This graph depicts school choice numbers of students going out of our district and the numbers coming into our district. The numbers out are on the top line, and as you can see have decreased and then stayed fairly stable. The numbers on the bottom line are the choice in numbers, which have been steadily increasing. This is a graph showing the budget trends for all funds since 2012. As expenses have grown, so has the budget. The challenge is that as the financial picture in the state began to look bleak, funding to the city from the state and the city's revenues did not keep up with the growing needs of our school district, as well as all departments of the city. And you can see how our per pupil spending relates to state averages and has changed over the years. The pie chart shows the distribution of funds spent in the school department. As you can see, the greatest amount of funding goes to what is most important in a school district, instructional services, primarily our salaries for our teachers and paraprofessionals. This is a graph of salary expenses for all employees. It is reflective of the loss of positions in the district and the increased expense of meeting our contractual obligations. The jump in custodial and maintenance expenses in FY13 was due to heating costs, costs for networking, and the cost of fixing a phone system in Whitebrook Middle School. And it stayed relatively stable since then. As you can see, there was a jump in utility costs in FY13. This was due to a spike in heating costs and the costs of networking and phone systems throughout the district. This chart shows special education expenses, salaries not included. The jump in special education costs is primarily due to the increasing costs of out-of-district placements. And these are costs that we really have no control over. We have also seen a spike in vocational tuitions, in part due to an increase in the cost of tuition at Smith Vocational starting this year. There was a substantial jump in their tuition costs this year. As our state's budgets suffered, grant funds to school departments have been reduced. We depend on these grant funds to provide targeted assistance to low-achieving students, tutoring for MCAS, professional development for teachers, curriculum materials, and technology. In this graph, you can see that school department funding sources have not kept up as the costs associated with state mandates, requirements, and laws have increased. School choice, our first section of bar graph there, shows that we've been using our school choice reserves to balance our budget as funds to the district have become more and more limited over the years. Circuit breaker is the next set of bar graphs. And you can see that that has gone up and down. The original promise from the state that once we had met, all districts had met a certain threshold of special education expenses, the overage would be covered at 100%. Now the goal is 75%, but that really hasn't been reached either. So it's a big cost without much support from the state. The next are our other revolving accounts, and these accounts are transportation and building use and tuition revolving accounts, funds that we get from transportation fees, tuitions from our preschool primarily, and building use fees. And again, you can see a representation of federal and state grants. Our proposed level service budget, this would be a budget that would enable us to keep all of the services and personnel we currently have, is $17,934,569. This proposed budget does not add any new positions. It does not replace 17 positions lost in the last 2 years. It does not replace lost funding for textbooks, materials, and supplies. It does maintain the important personnel, programs, and services needed to maintain our current educational program. So I'll pause here and see if there are any questions on any of this part of the presentation, and there are. Lori?
Could you just maybe clarify those out-of-district placements for the special needs, just to clarify how that cannot be cut, and those are fees that we have to pay no matter what?
The out-of-district placements are determined by a team meeting of special ed teachers and usually the parents of the students and special ed coordinators, and so they discuss the child's needs. And the only time that an out-of-district placement is considered is when we are not able to provide for the needs of a special education child in our district. So we have many programs and services in our district, but we don't have the programs and services that meet the needs of all of our students. Some of our students come to us with very complex profiles. And when that occurs, then the team decision will be that an out-of-district placement is required in order to meet the IEP, the individual education plan of the student. And at that point, the special education director begins to look for an out-of-district placement, and there's a process for that. If it's a residential placement, and we have a few of those, and on occasion we do have to provide residential out-of-placement services, they can run as high as $200,000 a year. So as I say, this year we are applying for extraordinary relief because our out-of-district tuitions are unanticipated out-of-district tuitions are $300,000 more than we budgeted for. And so there's a formula that the state has where you can apply for extraordinary relief based on a percentage of the tuitions above what you anticipated.
Thank you.
Other questions? Then, Andy, I think I'll have you come up and talk about the line item budget.
So the first tab in tab 5, I believe, is where this is, and I have it actually on a PDF. So is it the level services by DESI function code, or are we?
No, that ended up in tab 4. It was supposed to be in tab 5, but
tab
it's in
5
4.
starts with the 16 proposal, all funds 12 to 16. This is the summary. The top chart shows the funding sources, and the bottom is the summary of the DESI function codes. How is the budget compared from previous years in our 16 proposal. The 17.9 that was shown, that is an all funds request. The request that is being made from the city is a $16,773,838, which is a 6.5% increase over the city appropriation this year. And you can see the summary of the DESI function codes, the increases. Those are 99% are the contractual increases that we have for staff for all negotiated increases, and the projected annualizing of the increase in special education tuition that we experienced this year. Any questions on that before next page? And we're starting to peel away, as I say, at the layers of the onion, because the next page is the district-wide administration. And you'll see this increase. We can address the primary increase is due to the annualizing of tech assistant that we hired this year. Ashley brought in and reconfigured his budget to bring in someone to increase support district-wide, which has resulted in other cost efficiencies, but we've moved the dollars from the other line items that he had into funding this salary. But then everything else is primarily contractual increases for personnel. Questions on that? The next two pages are instructional services. You will see the big hit here is the decrease in school choice available. This plan we have here now does still hold us to the goal of not using current year receipts for school choice for current year expenses. So our FY16 proposed, we're using current year school choice this year, but our FY16 school choice receipts are not being used for our current plan. I mean, if you look through some of the history here, which also with the second iteration that we had to send out, there are a lot of influxes, ups and downs between some of the detail of the line items, and that's by things as Superintendent Follinsby referenced under the maintenance area, a new phone system at Whitebrook. We covered that internally. We're not able to, with these reductions in funds available to us, have these contingencies for when things occur to be able to, physician heal thyself. We're ended up really being strapped, and superintendent sent out an email today about freezing the budget. That's the reality of where we are now. But this is back to the 2000 series here is instructional services. This is where the rubber hits the road of what goes on in the classroom. So this is all our textbooks, instructional materials, instructional technology, teachers, guidance, psychological support services, and the like. So those are, and what we've done under each subsection, if you look and see, we actually have a personnel allocation. Give you an idea of the FTEs in there for every salary line. We put the FTEs for each DESI function.
And Andy, you might want to explain FTE.
FTE is full-time equivalent. So if you are a part-time person working 20 hours, let's say, in a regular 40-hour week, you are a 0.5 FTE. So it's a decimal calculation of personnel hours. The next is other school services. These here are the, when we see the attendance line, that is the Connect Ed and the Power School that we use, and it has transportation, health services, the nursing, and athletics and student activities. The next page is the custodial maintenance. We are going to be working with the facility director regarding a more codified, if you will, preventive maintenance plan, but with some of the savings that we're recognizing with some of the energy efficient programs that have been in place and are being put in place, we feel that we could rework this current budget to address those, be it with the new high school and other things that we see going on maintenance and custodial wise.
A question.
Yep.
I think I'm back one. Other school services?
Yes.
The food services, why do we not have numbers for FY14 and FY15?
Because in 14 and 15, we took those, I would say, out of the school choice. And so those were actually under another area, I would say. And FY15, honestly, we didn't budget for it because the goal being for us is to break even. So, and yes, we have, it's sort of I say pay now or pay later, but that was the goal. Is so as we were building the FY15 budget, when we were making our cuts, we felt that for the $20,000 to cut it now, and if we end up having to revisit, if they're not projected to break even, then we'll look elsewhere for it.
But our assumption for FY16 is to put the 20,000
I put it
in.
back there just out of the fact that we're going to be having a new contract. The RFP has to go out, so just as a contingency.
Thank
I
you.
would like to see that disappear, honestly. I mean, that's a potential, so. Back to the maintenance. So any questions on that? The next section is the fixed charges. And these are for lease payments and insurance related to our copiers, printers, and technology. Civic activities we don't have anymore. That was a long-standing arrangement with the previous administration in the city and the current auditor and finance director and the mayor. We met and came up with, I'd say it's more of an accounting thing, a better way and a more proper way to account for these expenses. So those in a sense have been rolled into the monies that were budgeted for that are actually budgeted now in our maintenance lines. And lastly, we have the tuitions to other districts. This does not include choice or charter tuition out. This is strictly the vocational, special education tuitions to private and collaboratives.
So that's $2.8 million exclusive of the charter and the choice?
That's correct.
There is a partial reimbursement for vocational tuition, but it comes to the city, and it's partial.
Is that when it says the non-public tuitions in the amount of $1.247 million? What's the distinction, between tuition to mass schools and non-public?
Tuition to mass schools are things such as the SPED portion of the vocational, and also be SPED programs that are in other school districts that might have a program that we don't have in there. But that also does include, the 9100 does include our C-Tech and Smith Voc.
And then the 9300?
That is strictly special education private placements.
So in a proposed $18 million budget, 1.25 million of that goes there. There's just a lot of numbers. I think that and I think a lot of people don't know about that. And as you said before, Nancy, most of that is we operate under a mandate, and then you and the committee make a decision about whether or not a student can continue to be educated within the district or has to be put in one of these placements.
Correct, depending on their individual education plan and whether we can provide the services.
And what percentage of that 1.247 million would you anticipate we would get reimbursed by the state in fiscal 16?
The formula is it is for circuit breaker reimbursements 4 times the foundation enrollment number pupil cost. So we're on the hook for about the first $37,000 of a cost, and then every cost above that, it is, as we were saying, the goal of 100%, then down to 75, and we're hearing for next year 66 to 68% is what they're shooting for FY16.
That's per pupil.
reimbursement.
The $37,000 is per pupil, right?
4 times the per pupil.
Right.
So we're on the hook for the first 37,000, and then any cost above that we get reimbursed 66 to 68% is what we're hearing for that, and then the difference we're also still on the hook for that.
Right. So under the present formula for education law in the state, through the chance of residential location, right, these families and these children are educated under Commonwealth law in Commonwealth-approved programs, but the expenditure is as haphazard as wherever they happen to live, to the extent of 30,000+ plus 33% of whatever additional costs there are. Right, and that is completely randomly associated, has nothing to do with our particular district. It's all related to where somebody happens to live.
Not necessarily
another
as far
district-
as residents, it's program placement. So it is, if the services are not, if we are not able to, after the team evaluation, provide services in district, there is a placement sought outside. So it isn't necessarily, I would say, residence-driven, other than the fact that if you're an East Hampton student.
Right, and that's the only part that I'm, unless another, I guess for comparative purposes, I'm trying to think, there could be another district where someone that we place out might conceivably, although it's hard to imagine, that they would have the internal resources, right?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Right? So what I guess I'm getting at is that if you compared us with 4 or 5 other random towns across the Commonwealth, odds are roughly the same, that they would face the same budgetary challenge and be on the hook for the same amount of money. So that additional expense associated with that one person, what I meant by random is, it's just that they happen to reside here, that it falls on this budget page.
Correct.
Because I've long believed that the education of special needs students should be a Commonwealth fully funded program, because you set up a perverse incentive otherwise.
If you look, actually, even I'd go one step further. The PL 94-142 law was designed for 100% funding.
Right.
That is why that grant, just to get technical, has a supplanting clause, which is because the federal government acknowledges that it has not met its end of the bargain. So you have that ability to supplant using your federal grants as long as you maintain what's called the maintenance of effort. So it's at both levels, state and federal, that, you know, they're not, if you want to say, not meeting their end of the deal. That's correct.
And clearly what can fluctuate for a district is a student with an IEP like that can move into your district at any point or move out of your district. So, you know, you really don't, it's hard to budget for.
Well, the perverse, what I mean by that is that we have economic incentives to discourage students like that from moving into the community and to encouraging them to move out. And that to me seems so fundamentally unfair. But that's the economic position that we're in. I suppose you could make that argument about children in general, but when we look at the per pupil cost of the average child to educate the average cost per student, that's redundant, sorry, in the city, that number's far smaller, and that, you know, that's going to happen in any community. I think, well, this is not directly related to the budget. I think it's important for people in at large to understand that the way the law is structured, it creates, you know, an unfortunate economic or financial consequence for the district, where you know, one of the really tough things is how hard you have to look, because it's usually less expensive to keep a student in district. But if the student's needs, right, are really genuinely better served out of district, that's an inherent conflict that's created by something that's outside of our hands. And that, to me, I don't want to sit on the committee that's making those decisions, because the finance says we want the students to stay here. The state mandate and the principle of equality says we want the child to get the best possible, I shouldn't say the best possible, an equal educational opportunity as anyone else in the district.
Correct.
So, and it looks like there's another cost, the transportation cost is increasing, and that's another one that,
And that is strictly
it's
special
nothing we can do.
education related,
Okay.
because we have been, we'll say, our current vendors have not had to ask us to negotiate, and now they've informed us that it's time they feel they need to revisit their price structure.
I see.
So,
Yep.
Either Nancy or Andy, are you able to say, and again, it's not directly related to budget, but the $300,000 more than what we anticipated for special ed this year, was that an example of students moving into the district? Was that litigation? What was kind of the lump of that hit?
Most of it was students moving into the district. Some of them came in over the summer, so we hadn't budgeted for them, or in the fall.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
Okay.
Can we now ask questions about the general presentation that was given before, or do we have more that we're presenting first?
Before we do that, how about if we have an opportunity for public speak at this time? And then we'll move into discussion among our group. Okay, at this time, if anyone would like to come and address the committee, you're welcome to do so at the podium. If you'd state your name and where you're from, that would be great. It looks as though no one would like to do that. So we'll move on. Okay, we'll move to a discussion portion of this meeting. And Peter, do you have something you want to start off with?
Well, in addition to that, the extraordinary expense that we were just highlighting, the other sort of elephant in the room is the impact of charter and choice. And I'm running through the numbers, and the page isn't numbered, but it's in tab 2, so just after the enrollment comparison document. And I think it's the same electronically as it is on paper. I looked at the electronic before I came over, and I've been trying to be sure that there's nothing different on the paper. I don't think there is here. So we can't control currently that $1.25 million that we were talking about before, but there's $1.35 million here that, at least theoretically, it's a matter of choice as opposed to a matter of mandate. And I was curious, from the superintendent, your sense of why the charter number jumped so much, because it sort of goes counter to the trend that we were hoping was in place right, because in the 2013 and 2014 years, choice and charter together were, from 2012 to 2014, it hovered literally in the 245 to 247 range, the number of students. And then it jumps basically by 30. And it looks like 2/3 of that is charter. Right, the number of charter students, am I reading this right, from 60 to 80?
Right, 60 to 80,
So-
2014 to this
Right,
year.
so that's prior to that, it was 55, 51, 58, 60, so they're all operating within, 5 points of 55. Now it's suddenly 80. And these are all operating within, really, all the way back through 2011. Choice and charter together are 252 at the high to 245 at the low in that stretch. And then this year it's at 279. So is it your sense that that's due to one-off factors that we might hope, as we're hoping with the special ed budget, will go back down going forward? Or is there some evidence that this is part of the new reality that we face and that we should be budgeting for?
Well, those are very good questions, and questions that we ask ourselves continually. Did you want to say something, Andy? You were, clearly we've had a charter school move into our community, and that had its impact. Andy, what did you want to say?
Well, it was that, but also with the charter reimbursement formula, unfortunately, that is not going to go down other than driven by enrollment. The charter reimbursement, the progression down results in less reimbursement to the city, which means more of the cost borne by the city for that charter tuition. So you will see that number go up.
And for a longer period of time, excuse me
Correct.
for interrupting,
That's
but
correct.
a longer period of time, because the school that we now have in the city is elementary.
That's correct.
previously, there were some students who attended that school when it was located elsewhere, but the other, well, I suppose it was also the one elementary school, one local charter elementary school, but the other two were high school, middle school to high school, and so the loss would occur later and run for less time, right?
Correct.
Can we track those numbers? I assume if we're being charged those tuitions for charter out, so we know exactly which schools we lost which numbers to.
That's correct.
So can we have that information?
You certainly can.
Yeah.
I don't have it
Yeah.
at hand right now.
Send it to the mayor.
But it's a
and to you
30%.
yesterday.
I mean, it jumps out because it's a 30%
Right,
jump.
exactly.
We
As
can
opposed to the charter,
forward
or the
it to
choice
you.
out, which was pretty much stabilized.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's grown, but not by, the growth there is by 10%. So,
No, exactly. I mean, I think that, and I think the thing that we find difficult is that the charter schools often have a niche appeal, and so it's difficult for us to be competitive with charter schools. For instance, Chinese immersion is a school that we cannot be competitive with. Pioneer Valley Performing Arts, although we have a wonderful arts and music and drama program in our high school, it's not the main focus of our high school. So if there are parents who want their students in a school like that, we can't offer that to them. So, yeah, it is a trend to open more charter schools, and it will be interesting to see what the impact is as we go on.
If I can just point out, though, on the positive side, at least our choice in numbers have been increasing.
Yes.
So that's good.
Yes, and our choice out numbers are staying pretty stable. And once a family decides to choice out to another district with their children, it's unlikely that they will come back in, no matter what we provide. However, I think we're very encouraged. We're going, the mayor and the finance director from the city and I are going to the Massachusetts School Building Authority Board of Directors meeting tomorrow to put forth a proposal for new schools in our district. And they will vote tomorrow, as I understand it, to accept us into the grant program and into an eligibility period. So we should know that after tomorrow. And then we will think about how we go forward. And certainly something that we have considered is a K-8 situation, but that's to be determined. As we get more information, there'll have to be a feasibility study and clearly a community input into that. But tomorrow's our first step. So I believe that if we are able to get these new facilities, K-12 certainly, pre-K-12, it's going to help us turn around these numbers in a way that's positive for our district. And I'm very excited about that.
Just back to the charter, and we can send this to you, but for, if you want to take this down, we currently, the second quarter for this fiscal year, 32 East Hampton students go to the Hilltown Cooperative Charter, 5 go to Hoyle Community, 20 go to the Pioneer Valley Performing Arts, 22 go to the Pioneer Valley Chinese Immersion.
22 go to Chinese immersion?
Yes, and then 1 goes to the Paulo Freire Social Justice.
what was the second one that you mentioned? I'm sorry, in the Holyoke?
Hoyle Community.
Right, and what was the number?
5.
5, right.
And what was the number for PVPA? Sorry.
20.
20.
So what,
You want to just go into them again?
from,
Sure.
32.
Sure.
For Hilltown.
Hilltown is 32, Hoyle Community is 5, Performing Arts is 20, Chinese Immersion is 22, and Paulo Freire Social Justice is 1.
what are the numbers from last year? Or do we have to dig those up? I'm on a magical phone somewhere looking for this.
Get those.
Okay.
Well, I guess part of the reason that I asked this, and I know that this goes beyond the budget, but it's one of the reasons that as I looked at the amount, I was reluctant to vote for this budget, and I'm still reluctant to vote for the budget, and for 2 reasons. One, there's a practical reality that I think that it has in the broader community, knowing that the mayor and the amount that we're asking from the pie as a whole and the limits in the growth as the tax base is set is limited, right? There's Proposition 2.5, right? There's a fixed, unless we have significant development in town, which changes the base, and we hope that's coming and will continue. And I wonder if, even after we move through this phase, if we couldn't return to looking at the way that we address this new reality of charter and choice. Because I agree that right now, with the current budget, we can't compete with a world language immersion program-based school. But I've driven by their building. Building's no great shakes. It doesn't have great curb appeal. When I drive up Route 9, I don't think, wow, that's a really cool building. And that's why I want my child to go there. That's about program. And I worry that even as I share the excitement of people in the community about building a K-8 elementary/middle school, that we rest our hope too much on buildings when some of these families are shopping program as well. And the building helps a great deal, but part of why I've supported an override in the past and raising the base for all public services in the community, all public services, is so that we would have the funds to invest in the kind of programming that would help us now, because this new building that we'd like to see is some time off in the future. With this trend continuing to work, it seems to be inexorably negative impact on this community. In the meantime, it would be great to have the resources to say, you know what, we can offer some of what these other schools are offering. And I've suggested to you before that in the in-between time, maybe one of the benefits that we might explore, one of the possibilities we might explore, is taking advantage of having 3 separate elementary schools. And instead of making them all the same and great in all the same ways, is making them 3 great but distinctive places for people in the community to get an education. And by saying, if you come to East Hampton and you want choice, we've got it right here. All of our elementary school education is already great, but there are different ways that you can approach that, just like there are different approaches that these schools offer in their niche.
Could I say something to that too? I think I agree with you that I think a lot of the choice decisions are made on program. I think there's another facet to it that I found, with my peers, parents of young children, kindergarten and elementary age children. I think there's a psychological and sociological component too, where there's this feeling that we as parents now have an option to shop around that wasn't always available to parents historically. And there is this assumption that if you start at A, which is the point where you live, and you choose to place your child anywhere else, the assumption is they're probably better off. Just the act of making the choice, and I think that that's something that we can also have an impact on. I think a lot of the work that we've done with community outreach, really educating parents to take a close look at what are the distinctions between our school systems and these other school systems in the local area. And there really aren't these vast differences, even in programming, even at the charter schools by and large. So I think a lot of that is, campaigning and getting information out there, welcoming them into our schools, having them meet our fantastic faculty and teachers, really seeing what is actually going on and defeating that misconception.
And Laura, I'll just piggyback on that, because I think that what we do hear from our parents who have their children in our schools is just such high praise for our teachers, our programs, the community that we have, the culture that we have in our schools. So I do think that another piece of this, which we've been actively pursuing for the last, since I became superintendent, and particularly in this last year with some energized PTO and some social media exposure that we haven't had before, is really trying to promote all that's good about the East Hampton schools. So I think that that's an important focus for our attention going forward, and I agree with what you're saying.
If I may, I'd like to back up for a minute and then come back to this, because there's a piece about special ed and the economic liability, if you will, that comes with special ed services that's just not sitting right with me. And I just want to make sure that what we have out to the public is that while we not only have a legal mandate to provide those services, we have an ethical and a moral mandate, I would dare say, to provide those services. And I wouldn't want anyone in this room or watching from home to think that our special ed folks are sitting in IEP team meetings and making those kinds of service decisions based on fiscal decisions, because I don't believe in my heart that anybody in this district or other would look at those services and make those kinds of decisions based on financial, make it from the business sense. I think that we need to draw a fine line and be very clear about where that line is when we talk about schools being businesses, and in special ed, there's no place for that. So I want to assure anybody watching that I don't think anyone at this table or any faculty in our district goes into those meetings with that type of a philosophy or ideology.
I appreciate you saying that, Wendy, because that truly is the case. You know, we embrace all students in our district, and we work very hard to support every one of our students in the very best way we can. And if an out-of-district placement is the very best placement for one of our students, then we certainly support that. We have a very active PAC here in East Hampton, an active and engaged special education parent group, and it makes our district richer. Having our special needs kids in inclusion in our classrooms makes our classrooms richer. And so I appreciate that you said that.
And then I wanted to come back to enrollment. One of the pieces about not being comfortable with the budget as proposed for me is looking at a level service budget and looking at enrollment numbers. And I'm going to bring this up again, and I brought it up with FY15. I'm looking at our kindergarten enrollment numbers. We already have our kindergarten class sizes this year at 24. And we lost a kindergarten teacher, and we're projected at an increase of 15 kindergartners, which on one hand is fantastic. We have 15 families in the community, you know, an increase in that kind of number coming into our district is phenomenal. But on the other hand, we're not able to add a position, and I'm just very concerned about that, and I'm wondering if we can hear more about
I'd like to just respond to that, because it's not quite as clear cut as that. So our class sizes vary every year in each grade level, and what we do is we will move staff around to a grade level so that we have appropriate class sizes. We end up doing that every year. So some classes that go through are large, and so we have a bubble with more teachers in those classes. And then the next year, the next class is not as large, so there are fewer teachers needed. So we do shift our teachers around based on their certifications to meet the needs of our students and maintain appropriate class sizes.
So I think that in this situation that you're talking about for this current year, right, the FY15 incoming kindergarten, we went from, the previous year had required 6 classrooms. So we went from 6 classrooms down to 5, and those 5 classrooms had, 23 to 24 students. So if we're talking about an additional 15, that actually looks like for this incoming kindergarten, they'll have a really potentially ideal class size, because there will be enough additional students to certainly warrant that 6th classroom without bringing the numbers back up into the mid-20s. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, I get the shifting of teachers. And I know there's no crystal ball. We can't hold things in concrete. I just feel very strongly about, and I know parents who have kids in kindergarten classes, and it's not to question the instruction level or the commitment that's given by our kindergarten teachers. But I think that sets the stage early on. I mean, I look back at the 4th grade bubble we had last year. When you watch that 4th grade bubble in 2013, 2014, we lost a chunk of them this past year. And I can't say for sure, it's totally subjective, but I know